Hey everybody, my name is Cheryl. I am host of the Homeschool How To podcast, and I'm doing a live tonight with Deanna and Leigh Ann. They are homeschooling moms, and we are going to be talking about how to transition from the public school life to the homeschooling life. Okay, here we go. We've
Hi.
got Leanne as well. Hi,
Hi.
Leanne. Hi, Deanna. So thank you guys for joining me tonight. I kind of want to just get into doing these lives because I think it just benefits people to hear like a day in the life of a homeschooler, honestly, and that's what my podcast is. But I wanted to zero in tonight on how to transition from like the public school life to the homeschool life. Because if all you know is get up at 6 a.m., get the kids on the bus, and you go to work and come home and cook the dinner and do it all over again, you kind of like, you can't conceptualize what a day in the life of a homeschooler looks like. For me, I was like, oh my God, are we going to like have to learn how to whittle and just whittle all day? Like, what are we going to be doing? We're going to be staring at each other. And now that I'm doing it, it is not the case at all. But first, I guess I'm going to throw it over to Deanna, just because you were the first one that signed in. But what can you give us a little brief synopsis of your life, how many kids you have, and kind of how you got into the homeschooling?
Okay, so I have two boys. They are now not littles, they are bigs. I'm actually graduating my oldest as a homeschool high schooler this May. I'm super excited. But, I actually was in the public school system as an educator for over 20 years. So it was a double whammy of transitioning from this public school idea of what learning looked like and also kind of transitioning my kids. They were in a private school setting, but yes, that schedule, So yeah, that's my background. I was a public school teacher. I received my doctorate in 2019, just several months before the pandemic hit. I had totally different plans. And it became really apparent very quickly that I couldn't stay in a system that was not able to serve my own children. Since then, I do have one that has returned to a private school setting. That was his choice. My other son was given that option, and he has many times repeatedly, he's like, I really love what I'm doing. So, I'm not shy about sharing that. I want to be very transparent. But, yes, it's definitely a learning curve for sure.
That's interesting. And we'll get into that a little bit later too, because I've had people on the podcast who said, like, yeah, my kids did decide to go back into school, or some of them did, some of them didn't. So that's an interesting dynamic. Leigh Ann, how did you get into the homeschooling world? Were you a
Yes,
teacher too?
I was. Um, I taught for right at 20 years also. I
Wow.
earned my second master's degree in 2019, right before the pandemic.
Yep.
Uh, yeah, so I taught middle school for a long time, and I worked in a really um, a small district, public school district, in a really small school. I was a middle school teacher, but the school system that I taught in was a K-8 system. So we didn't have middle schools. They went straight from the elementary to the high school. And I had middle school students, and my children went to school with me every day. We all went to the same building. And at the time that I started homeschooling, it's not something that I really jumped into because of the pandemic. I had already considered it for probably a couple of years. And I kind of did some research. I knew some homeschoolers. I did a lot of talking to people, started looking into the laws, started researching curriculums. And then when the pandemic happened, it just was it was just good timing. And I actually wish that I had done it at least 6 months before I did, because the year that we were schooling through a pandemic, I let my kids remain with the public school system, and they were at home with me, but I let them remain with the school system. And I have a lot of regret with that. I wish I had pulled them then. But I just kind of let it be because we were in the middle of a year, and I was like, it'll be over soon. And then I thought things would be different the next year, and we kind of went back in like a hybrid situation. But it just didn't work. It for me, it just didn't work. And I let my kids stay in school that year because I didn't want to pull them out in the middle of the year. I guess I thought I would be harming them somehow. Again, lots of regret there. But at the end of that year, I finally pulled them out of school, and I actually continued to teach in the public school system for 3 years while I homeschooled my kids. Um, and I just quit my job this past year, so I've been home with them. This is our 4th year of homeschooling. I've been home with them this year. I have one in high school. I have 2 boys and 2 girls. I have one in high school. She's ninth grade ish. I don't even know what grade my kids are in anymore. I can't remember. I have one that's like middle school. He's a couple years younger than her. I have one that's probably about 3rd grade, and then I have another one. And I was really glad. I mean, the timing for me quitting my job and staying home with my kids was perfect because my 4th one started her kindergarten year this year. So all 4 of them are homeschooled, and again, I've given mine the option also to go back to school if they want to. We don't have a good private option here, but there was a time when I wasn't sure I was going to get to quit my job, and I told them, if you want to go back to school, you can. I didn't know that it would be the same school because I had changed jobs, but no, they didn't want to. They wanted to stay home, so that's where we are. We're all home together now.
So now, did you guys experience we're just going to replicate school at home because that's what we all know. You guys worked in the schools for 20 years. I went to school for 20 years. And, so it's sit at a desk. Here's math. We're doing, our math worksheets, our math lesson, and then we're doing English, and then we're doing reading, then we're doing spelling, and we're sitting at a desk the whole time. Like, is that kind of how you guys went right into it? Or did you know, like, there's another way? And it probably even from when you guys got out of college initially, there was a better way to even teach kids then, and the regulations got more tight and more tight as the years went on, and the tests got more important or stricter. So did you guys have this sort of like, I'm replicating school at home and man, this is not working period? I'll let you go, Deanna.
So interestingly, to kind of go back in history, our history, when the boys were super little, I actually did homeschool them. And we even had other friends of the family bring their kids, and they became part of the little homeschool setting. And I share a lot about that on my page and everything. But I had come to that determination during that time. Okay, like I'm trying to be a kindergarten teacher at home with my own kids, and that's not working. So when we got to that point, and part of our story as well is basically the way that things were in the classroom, it just couldn't meet particularly my older son's needs. And it was becoming a narrative for him that was the narrative that he was being told was becoming his narrative about his belief in himself. And so a lot of that became like, I'll give you an example, and this isn't everybody's story, and I'm not saying this is how it has to be, but when we started, he was about 3 grade levels behind in math. And our goal was just to do what he needed. But within 6 months, we had caught him up to grade level to where he would be now. We can talk about grade levels. I know that's kind of a very different topic, but his capabilities, it just wasn't being met within the classroom box. And he started to realize he was capable. So for that purpose, when we talk about replicating the classroom, very quickly, I realized we needed to implement different dynamics, such as we had a trampoline. And they were taking a class through community college, their Spanish, and we would conjugate verbs while they jumped on the trampoline. I mean, we were doing these things because, yes, sitting in the desk wasn't working for them, right? And, nobody was ever going to be able to teach him that dynamic of completing his assignment or following through on a task until I scaffolded it for him. And that just wasn't possible within a classroom setting. That's nothing on the teachers or anything, but we just needed a different dynamic. So relatively quickly, we had gotten to that point where I just knew it needed to be a different situation. So we sat in the hammock. They could sit in the beanbag. Wherever they were learning, as long as if they had a task and their core work was done, then that was really up to them to have that seating arrangement for that worked for them.
Oh. Yeah. Leanne, what about you? Did you replicate school at home at first, or did you kind of know from the get-go, like, we're doing this differently for a
Yeah,
reason?
I think it's a little bit of yes and no. I think, it was pretty hardcore ingrained into me. And even now, even after homeschooling, as long as I have, I still have to remind myself sometimes I don't have to do it that way anymore. It's just,
Hmm.
I mean, that's what I've done. That's what I've done forever. I was a public school kid. I taught public school for so long. I just, I have to remind myself of that. So yeah, in the beginning, I think I probably did do a lot of school at home, and I have a lot of homeschool moms now that will reach out to me and ask me questions like, "What do I do now? Like now that I've pulled my kid," and I don't ever want to tell anybody else what they have to do, but I do encourage people, take some time and unschool, watch movies together, read books together, hang out together, go on field trip. You don't have to do school right away, especially if they're kind of detoxing. And I don't know that I should call it that, but that's essentially what it is. You're detoxing.
Yeah.
And
Well, it's especially if it was there's been some, I hate to use this word because it's overused, but there's some trauma
yeah,
associated with the classroom setting, quite
absolutely.
honestly.
And that's something that I did not do, and I wish that I had. So I guess I'm talking about a lot of regret today, but I wish, looking back, I wish I had done a little bit of that, because I have a pretty similar experience. My one of my two boys are my middle kids, and my oldest son had a really hard year the year before, and they had the option of either virtually schooling or being an in-person student. But even when they were in person, they were only in person part time. They were virtual the other part of the time. It was a very confusing, crazy thing, which meant they were staring at screens all day. Regardless of whether, I mean, there was no point in really even bringing them home virtually or sending them to school, because they were pretty much staring at a screen most of the time anyway. But I just remember one day walking down the hall, because I had a different position at the time. I was not in the classroom all the time. So I just remember walking down the hall one day, and I walked by his classroom, and I just thought, I'll peek in. And he was sitting at his desk with a mask on. He was very dejected, and he was crying, and he was probably about 8 or 9 years old. And I was like, yeah, we're done. I'm done. He had been at
Mhm.
school in person for 3 days. And so I was like, okay, we're going to be virtual so he can lay in his bed and do his work, or not do his work, because his work wasn't even really that important at the time. And so, yeah, I really wanted to just kind of step back, and he was my child that had an ADHD diagnosis. He's since then been diagnosed with dyslexia, and generally did not care much for school, and he's still a kid who's just like, well, learning, whatever. He loves to learn, but he wants to learn what he wants to learn, and math and science and social studies, and like those were not his things. So um, the funny thing is that at the time I knew that he was probably very far behind as far as like grade level went. I would say if I were to put him back in school right now, he probably still would be. But I met him where he was. I figured out what
Absolutely.
that's where we are. And he is where he is, and I don't have to compare him to anyone else or where anyone else is anymore. And I just he does really well. And I guess the craziest thing is we do a lot of the, like, hey, it's really pretty, let's go do school outside, and we'll do it on the patio. Or I'll give him like my youngest son, when he was doing spelling words, I'd give him sidewalk chalk and say, go write your go write your spelling words in the driveway. Or we do gardening. Sometimes I'll let them come out there and do that. We go for walks, things like that. But yeah, we do still sit down at the table and do schoolwork. But when we need a change, we have the opportunity to do that. Sometimes we just don't do it at all. If we're just having a rough time or a bad day, or we just need to take a break, we just do. And sometimes, there have been a few days that their schoolwork was, we're going to go outside and clean the yard. or we're going to do yard work, or we're going to do housework, or whatever. And when we get done, if we still have time for reading or math, we'll do it. But if not, because those are learning opportunities and those are hands-on things that they need to learn. That's real world. I take them in the kitchen and let them cook. My kids can all, even my 8-year-old, he of course still needs some help, but my kids can all cook something in the kitchen unassisted, and just ask me for help when they need it. And before homeschooling, that was not, I didn't even try to send them in there. Because for me, it was go to work, come home, rush to get dinner on the table, and we schooled while we were eating, and they would go to bed right after we were finished with school. It was an all-day thing. And so now it's just very relaxed. And so I did do that sort of in the beginning. Looking back, I kind of wish I hadn't, but we have transitioned a little bit so that sometimes we do school at home and sometimes we don't. But even when we are doing it, it looks different. And my oldest son, who was the most reluctant about school, when I offer to do something different, he's the one who's like, let's just sit at the table and do our book work. And I never thought he would say something like that, but he's okay with it now because it's his individually. And so his perspective's a little different now.
Yeah, I love that. And I think the biggest realizations for me doing the podcast and talking to you guys and other homeschooling families was like that there, for instance, family style learning is like a different way you can present information to multiple children at multiple different ages. You might be doing the same, World War II, but each grade or level is going to have a different level of what they have to complete to get their work accomplished. And it's so funny because like reading the kids books that I'll get from the library, I use book lists like read aloud revival, and so they're not books that I typically would have just gone to the library and picked out myself, but because somebody else smarter than I am did. I'm reading them and I'm like, wow, I never learned this in school. And like, I'm learning so much about, the Hudson River, the way a butterfly and a cocoon, what happens in the springtime. And it's like so eye opening. So I love that. And I also love the idea of like, and I'm sure you can do this on all different unit studies, but like specifically a nature study where you are learning within that topic of learning about, say, springtime. You're doing reading, writing. You can incorporate math in that, whether it be counting the eggs that the chicken had, cooking. There's math in everything. You just have to pull it out from, find it. History, geography, economics, like art, poetry, music, all of this stuff can be integrated into like this one like lesson that you're doing a day on this topic. And when the hour or 2 hours is done and you've, done a nature walk and, done a little bit of artwork or a craft or baked something, read a book, wrote a story about it, it's like, oh, well, you've already done every single subject that you had to do based around this interesting topic that we might have all picked together. And it's like, wow, what a beautiful way to learn. Like it's just so different than where we think of in the school, like, okay, 9 different subjects, all in their 38-minute time block. And when we hear that bell, it's time to turn it off and, turn on your reading cap, turn off math. Science can be incorporated in everything. So, yeah, it was like really eye opening for me. And it took almost, a year or two of talking to homeschooling families to be like, wow, that's really a way we can do this, learning at home. Deanna, I know you have the cutest YouTube page. As my son and I watch it, you are like Miss Rachel and Blippy mixed together with like phonics.
Thank you. Honestly, it's like, and I think I shared this recently in a reel, it's like realizing that even though I left that behind, I didn't have to stop sharing that, and my boys are at a point where that's not their world, they're at a different place in life, right? And that's to that point, one thing, and I think there's a lot of parents that if they're wondering if they can um, handle that task and tackle, teaching maybe even outside their range. I mean, I was a K-3 lady. I always thought, and props to you, because I always thought like middle schoolers would like eat me for lunch and spit me out, like, but I had to really get outside my comfort zone. I had to be okay with not knowing. I had to be okay with looking for resources. And I had to be okay with saying, all right, we're going to work deductively, and we're going to say, what are his goals? And what does he need for his goals? And in order to do that, in order to have the opportunities that he wants, what does he need? Not what do others think he needs. So,
Yeah.
that was very, like, for instance, we do core classes where he's meeting certain requirements so that he's going into cinematography, and with the time he wanted to do architecture. So we were looking at from that perspective, and what do you need for that, and stuff. But at the same time, we still took 2 days a week, and we did unschooling. And unschooling for us was he drove the projects. Now there were some parameters, like you can't just be, gaming all day. I mean, if there's a specific thing you're working on, and or if you want that to be part of your day, but there had to be some parameters. And he built my green screen in 24 hours.
So I was going to ask, if he's going into some cinematography, does he edit your videos for YouTube?
He does.
I mean, so I just want to comment on this. How beautiful is this, that you ended your 20-year career in the school system to start teaching kids online, where you have been able to foster your son's love of cinematography to where you guys can now work together to make these awesome videos. Like, that's
It's
homeschooling.
forever
Like, oh my God, I
be
love it.
like this testament to, and there's been hard moments, like in the beginning. You really realize, oh wow, there's some seasoning here that needs to happen, and some really difficult moments where he had to grow in skills out, because he's extremely talented. I mean, he built a computer in one afternoon this weekend for a friend. He installed, I mean, he's just incredible. But there were some skill sets we've developed throughout this where he's learned how to interact, how to communicate. Now he'll come to me and say, hey, Mom, I had this thing coming up this week, and I was thinking, can we, schedule to work on this on such and such day? Yeah. Because before, he didn't have that skill set. That skill set is not something he was going to learn in the classroom. The skill sets that he needed to work on, and we have a very similar situation, as you shared, and it was an atmosphere that focused on his weaknesses. And what I feel that we've been able to do here is we've been able to, yes, we have to address that. We have to season the pot. We have to get him growing in those areas so that he can enter the world and be a successful human being to what his potential is, right? But at the same time, nurture his strengths, honor his strengths. He's out there building um a deck that he designed around a tree, and he laid concrete, like and I like, have you ever laid no. My dad brought the materials from, what's that? I'm putting in concrete. And I'm like, okay. And he did. And it's beautiful. He just does these things. And so that's one thing for, if you're navigating homeschooling a child that is outside, what you think that you can tackle, look for those resources, look for the community. That would be a huge thing. He has an eBay store. He packaged a whole guitar to mail, and he created the whole packaging. Took him 3 hours, and I'm like, that's geometry, that's packaging engineering. um that's an assessment of his real knowledge. And that was to me, it's amazing because it's way outside my wheelhouse, and that was one of my biggest fears, was that I wasn't going to be able to meet that. But I just gave him the resources and found the resources, and let him.
I love that. That's so awesome. And then Leigh Ann, you wrote a book. Is it about your experience leaving the school system to homeschool and how to do that? Is it like a how to?
Yes and no. It's sort of like part how to, in part memoir, I guess. I guess there was a little bit of conflict of interest when you work in the public school system, but you homeschool your kids, and I was pretty vocal about it. I wasn't shy about it. When I left, um, I had 3 kids in public school with me. One of them had just done preschool. That was as far as he had gotten, and he doesn't even really remember that. But so 2 of my kids have really been like, completely homeschooled, and the other 2, they remember being in school, and a huge chunk of their school career so far was spent in public school. So it was a little bit of conflict of interest. I had students walking up to me in the middle of the day saying, are you going to send them back next year? Are they coming back? When are they coming back? And it was hard because it didn't take long for me to realize that unless they weren't happy, I was never going to send them back. That was never going to be in our immediate plans. And I can never say never, but I just knew that it wasn't something that we were planning on. And so I would just say, no, no, we're happy where we are. And it was hard because a lot of people ask questions. A lot of people ask questions out of concern. I think they worried that we were doing something we shouldn't be doing, or that we had secrets, or that people are curious. People don't, and I think a lot of people were just genuinely like, hey, I don't know anything about it, what's it about? So I was blogging a little bit at the time, and I started kind of writing, and it sort of morphed into a book, just kind of telling our experience and transition, because for 3 years I was working every day and then going home and homeschooling my kids, and people just didn't get it. They just didn't understand, and I didn't understand. When I started doing it, I didn't know. I knew homeschoolers, but I didn't really understand what it was about, what it entailed. And so, yeah, it's pretty much just about kind of our story, and about resources that you can use if you're transitioning like we did.
And what, like, because there's a lot of people who are working and they're like, well, I would homeschool, but I have to work. What did you do with the kids during the day while you
Yeah,
were
I get
at work?
that question a lot. Well, I can't homeschool. I would love to homeschool, but I can't because I work. And I would be like, well, so do I. Here I am at work, because that's when I would get it sometimes. But yeah, it was just different. I had a babysitter for my youngest when she was really little. I would take her to a babysitter, which killed my soul every day, but I did it until I. And there was always the plan for me to be at home with them, but sometimes that's just not an overnight thing. That's just something that when you're bringing in, and I didn't bring in a huge, I was a teacher. I didn't make that much money, but I was bringing in probably a third of the income at the time. And it was, paying our mortgage. And so we had to have a place to live, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I did have to work even. And there was even a time when I thought maybe I would get to be home part-time and work part-time. Um, but I did. I took my youngest one to a sitter when she got to be a little bit older, and I finally got to where I had teenagers. I actually kind of lost my sitter. Not unexpectedly. She gave us a little bit of a heads up, but I didn't have a lot of time between transition. And so we ended up at a preschool 4 days a week. And then I would have my husband, because my husband works a very odd shift, so he would be able to be home with her like one day a week. And so we kind of transitioned into that. And then eventually it was once her preschool was over, or on that one day a week that she wasn't in preschool, my teenage daughter would keep her at home with her. And then my youngest son, he was school age, so he was really too old to be at the babysitter. And honestly, it wasn't in our budget for me to send 2 kids to the babysitter at the time. So he stayed home with my teenage daughter, but he's always been pretty self-sufficient and well behaved, so I didn't worry so much about him. But we just kind of got along the best we could, and literally there were weeks that we literally, like, it was day to day, like, okay, today we're doing this, what are we going to do tomorrow? And we did that for years.
Well, I can imagine yeah, that feels like, am I doing the right thing? Because what are they doing all day? Are they on their games? Are they on the internet? Are they sitting in the couch all day? Are they doing anything productive? Are they just better off in the school system? Or at least I can pop in and look at them crying in their classroom, you know. But like, did that
Oh
go
yeah.
through your
Yeah,
mind?
yeah, I had thankfully it really worked out when the very first year that I homeschooled them, I changed jobs. So I continued to work in the same school district, but I got a district job so that I was able to have a little more flexibility and a little more freedom. I could call home in the middle of the day, what's everybody doing? Um, my daughter had a phone and I could, and she's always been pretty trustworthy. So even if like the boys were up to no good, she would rat on them. So I could ask her like, "Hey, what are the boys doing?" And she would tell me if I was going to be driving by my house for going from one school because I traveled to different schools in the district. I could stop in and check on them. There were days that I would go pick up a pizza because there was a pizza place between my office and my house, and my house was maybe 5 minutes from my office. It was a really short drive. I would pick up a pizza and bring it home because I could take 30 minutes to come home and eat lunch with them. So I would drop in on them or I would call them. At first, it was really productive. I would give them things to do and say XYZ has to be done when I get home. And it might be an assignment, it might be a math worksheet or they would have to read a chapter from their book. It would just be, whatever. Nothing that they couldn't do without me. And there would usually be a chore or two. Everybody has a chore and all of it has to be done when I get home. And if it's not done when I get home, there's going to be a consequence. So that was really how we started out, just so that I could make sure there was some productivity. And of course, my husband was home some during the day so that he could kind of manage that too. It sort of evolved into um, lots of sleeping late, which really didn't bother me because they were kids and they needed to sleep. So they would sleep late, and I would come home and say, "What time did you guys get up?" And it would be 10 or 11. So they would be sleeping half of my workday. Sometimes I would come home and things didn't get done and I would say, okay, we're going to lose this consequence or whatever. But, for the most part, they just kind of hung out together and they might watch movies together or, whatever. But, and as soon as I would come in the door, they would know it's time to go. And so we would do whatever our routine was in the afternoon, but it wasn't ideal. I did not love the situation, and there were times that I thought I would be better off sending them to school, but I did not love the mad rush in the morning for school. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to do it to myself, but I definitely didn't want to do it to my kids anymore. It had become really stressful to get 4 kids up ready to go to school. It was just a lot, and kids that were very reluctant to go to school at that. And we had some issues at school that, especially with my oldest daughter and classmates, and I just thought, they're better off at home, and there's 3 of them together, so and they get along for the most part. So ultimately, it was just we kind of got by the best we could for as long as we could. I'm glad to be home with them now, and they're better off with me home, but we did the best we could for that time.
I,
Yeah,
I
no. Oh, and I think that's so important because the people, yes, they always ask, how could I work and do this? And yeah, whether it's asking the grandparents for help, hiring a babysitter, a local homeschooling family that has teenagers that could maybe,
Well,
maybe they want to intern or whatever and be the au pair or a teacher to your
I,
kids or earn some money. There's so many
there,
resources out there. Go ahead, Deanna.
I
Oh,
would
no.
always just tell people when they would ask me that, you make time for the things that are really important to you, and homeschooling is important to us, so we make the time for it. And me working full time just meant that I had to be a little more vigilant. Was it hard? Yes. Could I have used working as an excuse to not homeschool? Yes. But homeschooling was important, and that's what we make time for those things that are important to us. So that's what we did.
yeah.
Yeah, I left my government job of 16 years, so I just hit my 6-figure salary, and I was like, oh, this is like all I wanted. I was like, I don't ever have to take another test again. I'm where I want to be. Just retire and make 60% of my salary till I die, and yeah, well, that changed. So, But I had a post the other day that I was just looking through some of the comments on it because it was me holding my baby. She had, well, my 2.5-year-old, but she had a stomach ache when she woke up from her nap. So she just crawled back on me and fell asleep. And I was just kind of like, wow, how many times did my son have a stomach ache at daycare? And I didn't know because I was in my cubicle and maybe he was uncomfortable to tell somebody, or maybe he didn't know if it was bad enough to tell somebody, or they didn't know if it was bad enough to call me. And so they just kind of shuffle them to the next activity. Oh, do your coloring first or go sit and watch TV. But like, he didn't have mom there. And I just, like how many, like you were mentioning with the sleep. I mean, she was done with her nap, but she crawled back up on me and fell back to sleep because she was so tired, obviously fighting something. And it's like, even just in the mornings when my kids, they generally do sleep late so that they can spend more time in the evenings with my husband when he gets home from work. So we do go to bed between 10 and 11 and they get up between 8 and 9:30. But that works. Like, I'll get up and do podcast stuff at, 5:36. So yeah, like just to let their body sleep until they're ready to wake up. When you think of like the synapses that are growing and making connections in their head, or maybe they're fighting a bacteria or germ or virus or something, or they're having a growth spurt, all this stuff, that when we're like jolting them awake at 5:30 a.m. to rush, 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 rush. I was even thinking about that the other day. I'm like, my whole life, my mother just rushed me everywhere we went. And like, the lady is 77 years old now. She is still rushing places. Like, you have nowhere to go. You have nowhere to be. You have no job. You don't have any like children living with you. You have two little dogs. There's nowhere to rush to. And she's still like, come on, we gotta go. Come on. I'm like, wow, that's just so ingrained in her. I don't know how she has not had some sort of heart attack from this or me, but I still notice that in myself because I like heard that from her for so many years. And it's like I'm trying to break the cycle now to like, no, just let them like relax and wake up. And we went to a play group today. I said I'd be there between 12 and 12:30. I got there at 1:15. I'm like, how do people get to work and school? I don't know how I ever did it
I
because
forgot.
I can't even get two kids somewhere at noon. Deanna, what was like the biggest, like, if you could tattle now about not, and then like you mentioned before, it's not the teacher's fault, and I get in trouble for saying stuff, but it's like, no, I know it's not the teacher's fault. They're stuck in a system. They're getting underpaid and under resourced, more kids, more requirements. But like, there's also this societal thing about school, like the kids, the social media, all this stuff happening younger and younger that we never had to deal with when I was going into school. I'm 41. We did not have social media when I was in school or phones with internet. What are some of the awful things that you saw that you were like, okay, I really don't want this for my kids? Like, was there anything that stuck out?
Well, okay, so yes. Um, so we initially, actually, after starting off with the homeschooling setup, we went into the public school setting for a very brief time. Um, and I had a colleague whose children went to the same school, and her son was very similar to my son. And I watched some things unfold with that child who's brilliant. And then I remember this situation that happened in kindergarten with my son, and I went to work and I shared it with my colleague, and she said, "You're kidding me. They did the same exact thing to my son." And I was seeing the path that her child was taking, and I saw what was going to transpire. And we have a thing, it's called the school to prison pipeline. And even if you want, like, let's say you have a child that is struggling behaviorally and a parent wants to look for resources for them, they cannot offer those wraparound type resources until your child has an encounter with either the judicial system or the police. So you're talking about a very, very uh, a system that is built in where we use suspension, taking away recess, very consequent. Now, I'm not against consequences. Life has consequences, right? But when you're dealing with a child whose maybe brain isn't even working in the same way, and they're not making those connections. I mean, I myself, I was a very quiet student. I went for 3 years without ever completing my work, but I was reading at a high school level when I was 8. And they kept passing me along. But I remember sitting every recess wondering what I was doing wrong. Why couldn't I get my work done like the other kids? But I also was making patterns out of the number system on the page, the word, I was giving myself what I know now as brain breaks. But nobody ever asked me, hey, why is that hard for you? You're reading at a high school level, And so I saw this type of thing start to transpire with my son. And, we went to a private setting. There were things that worked until it didn't. And I was watching a child come home absolutely destroyed, with a narrative that I knew was pedagogically like incorrect, but this is the narrative that he was receiving. And I've been criticized for leaving the education system because there's so much going on in education. But honestly, these children have one mom. And my biggest responsibility to society is to get these children and raise them to be the humans that they were created to be. And that's what I did. That's what I left to do. And so, I saw a lot of this. My son is dysgraphic, and he had an ed psych report, and he was not permitted to be given the accommodations that the ed psych recommended, because they called it borderline cheating, that he was not copying the words, the vocabulary words from the board. And this is the message my son was being given. So this is what I decided, that we were going to flip the switch, flip the narrative. And you know what? Pretty soon, as I scaffolded it, he began to do those tasks on his own. When he took community college classes, they would say, you get extra credit if you handwrite out the notes. And I say, hey, you know what? You have accommodations. You have an ed psych report. He goes, no, I'm going to do this. It was his decision. Okay, as long as you know what's available to you, you know how we can request. No, I want to do this. That was his decision. But he chose that for himself, right, at that point, because he had gotten to the point where he could manage that task. It took him extra effort, a lot of extra effort, but that was the decision he wanted to do for himself. But when he was in a situation in the classroom where the teacher then would just erase before he could even write it down. And my mom was, talk about career education. She was a principal when I was growing up. That's why I'm not a principal. She was an amazing principal, an award-winning principal. But let me tell you, it never ends. It's lonely at the top. I didn't want that. I won't even get my admin credential. I had people tell me, please get your admin. No, I don't want anything to do with that. But anyway, she was working with my son, and she told my son one day, she said, sweetheart, nobody there's going to help you. We're going to have to, so this is what I had to remove him from. I had to remove him from that. And now I have this confident child. He just took his first international trip on his own. He just flew overseas. My father-in-law, my husband's from Norway, so it's a trip he's done before. Did he miss his flight in Germany? Yeah, he did. But you know what? We coached him through how to navigate that. And it cost us a couple $100s to fix it. But you know what? It was the most life learning he's ever done in his 18. He's now 18. And so, that's another thing that homeschooling and having that flexibility in the schedule has allowed us to do, because we do have a family dynamic that has family overseas. So it's allowed for more of those connections. And then when he gets back and there's that jet lag, we can account for that. And I feel that the learning that he gets just from navigating the travel alone, not even to take into consideration the cultural factors and his family heritage and all of that, is enormous. Yeah. And he's going to college in the fall. He went to admitted students day today at Biola. I dropped him off and everything, but it's going to be a transition. But I feel like these experiences, okay, there's going to be a learning curve, but it's okay. He has so much going for him, and that's a message of parents. Yeah.
What is the school to prison pipeline that you mentioned?
So the school to prison pipeline is basically, and you can get into all sorts of demographics, and stuff that it affects. But it's basically that we start very young suspending our children. Now, there are some things that we absolutely cannot tolerate. There's just no question. And we definitely need to have parents more involved. That's a different topic. But instead of seeing what's at the root and the core, we're suspending students, and we're in a very chaotic system right now. I I have to tell you, I saw colleagues that had their whole rooms torn apart by a kindergarten student that was an extreme, not just once or twice. Okay, this was a regular occurrence because the student was in distress. She was destroying the classroom. They would have to evacuate. These are 5-year-olds, you know? And then after school, the teacher, my colleague, would then, have to reconstruct, put the books back on the shelves, try to staple up the bulletin board. We're dealing with but then the answer to that is suspension or other measures that are punitive, but they're not really getting to the core of the
Right.
the issue at heart. And there's just a lot that goes into that. But what I did see was there was a situation that happened in the first grade. My son now was in the public school system, and they were going to suspend him. And I thought, first of all, it wasn't even reasonable. And I thought, we're talking about a first grader. He didn't threaten anybody. He didn't do bodily harm. It wasn't anything to that need. But the first thing was, we're going to suspend him. And I could see it, and I told you I had witnessed the path before of other people that were traveling down that path. And how, if we don't channel students, especially students that are gifted or twice exceptional, that have those overlapping, their ADHD and they have gifted characteristics, and we don't learn how to channel those characteristics, then we're focusing on their weaknesses and their deficits. We're not building up their strengths. And there's a lot of interesting research about who's in the prison system and their experiences in education. Yeah.
Yeah, the reason I asked was because I had somebody on my podcast a couple weeks, or I just released it, and Gabriella, and she had said she worked in the school system, and there was, when she found out that they were using third grade reading test
Yes.
scores to predict how many prison beds they would need, that shocked her, and she didn't want to be part of this anymore, and they weren't actually fixing the situation. They were just making more prisons, and I had kind of looked into it a little and made a post about it on my Instagram page, and then people were writing on it saying, that is not true. Do not post things that are not accurate. And I was like, well, okay, well, why are you saying it's not accurate? So I looked up, and it is true that the statistic of your reading scores of the third grade will predict, it is true, whether it's, are they making more beds, are they building more prisons, is kind of the controversial thing. So it was so when you looked it up on, I don't know, whatever, with the fact checkers, Politico is like, this is not a true statement, they do not make more prison beds because of third grade test scores. It was like, okay, but the poor third grade test scores does predict how many future people are in the prison. So are we changing what we're doing at around that third grade and lower mark to make sure that these kids are able to read?
Yes.
So that they don't end up in
Because
prison. Like that's what we're trying to focus on. That was the point of the post. And people are like, it's not a true statement because they're not really building prison
and they missed
beds.
the whole
But the
point.
fact is the statistic is still
Yes.
what it is. So we've got to get to these kids before third grade. And there are places like Finland that don't even open up. They don't do any formal education before age 7. So what are we doing wrong if they're not doing anything other than
I,
play? They're doing play, they're outside, they're experiencing
yep.
friendships and fresh air and nature, and they're not even opening up a textbook, and they don't have the same issues that we're having. What We're doing something
And
wrong, because we've got kids that go to all day school at preschool
Yeah.
And so it's like that's where it's getting at. So Leigh Ann, you're nodding. What
Well,
what do
I'm
you
just
have to
it's
contribute to
like
that?
I just of course and I'm in my 40s. I'm 43 years old. I went to kindergarten half a day.
Mm-hmm.
And I just had this conversation with some friends recently. I was like, but when I was in kindergarten, we had this really sweet teacher and we colored and we painted and we did crafts and we played with Play-Doh and we went outside and we ate a snack or lunch or something. I think we might have even had like a 15-minute nap, rest, something, I don't know. And then we went home.
Mm-hmm.
Remember sitting in a desk. I might have sat at a table with friends, but I don't remember sitting in a desk and doing any kind of work. And I could read when I started kindergarten, but I could read because my mother had read books to me. Now, she did not set me down and taught me how to read, but she had read books to me, bedtime stories, and I had picked up on words. And
Yeah.
I could read. I wasn't probably a fluent reader, but I could read a little bit when I started kindergarten. And now I look at my two oldest children who went to school, and I was told that my son was behind at the end of his kindergarten year, and I felt horrible because the person that he had as his kindergarten teacher was lovely. She was beautiful, she was sweet, she was kind, she loved the kids. She and I were colleagues. I adored her. But I was told that my child was behind at the end of his kindergarten year, and she really didn't seem that concerned about it because she knows, like, it's okay. He was only, he had just turned 6 a couple months before he finished kindergarten. But she was like, he is he's a little bit behind. Well, why is he behind? Well, he's not reading. So he's 6. Who cares if
He's six.
he's reading?
Yeah,
But
the
it's
average
so
age
much.
is 6 to 7.
Yes. And the crazy thing to me is that we're forcing things like that on kids at such a young age, and then they get to 3rd grade and they still can't read. Well, how about we let them learn when it's time for them to learn? And I have read research. I've not done the research, but I've read research that a child can learn to read as late as like 10 years old, and as an adult, you can't tell the difference between a child who learned to read at 5 and a child who learned to read at 10. So why are we forcing this on our kids? Why not just let them naturally come to it? And it's because of standardized testing. It's ridiculous. We're forcing so much on them that it's having a negative effect, and we're labeling kids with, we're slapping IEPs and 504s and things on kids who may not even need it. Meanwhile, we have some kids who probably do and they don't get it at all. It's
Yep.
it's completely broken. I don't understand it at all.
Yeah, speaking to your point, it's actually been shown that kids who we have a developmental spectrum of reading, and it's anywhere from 3 to 8, and we have those outliers. Well, the average age is 6 to 7,
Yeah,
right? And so somehow our answer to our literacy crisis is to teach them younger, even though we see that the places in the world that are the most successful, Norway, and I know this for a personal fact, my husband grew up there, 100% literacy. Finland, 100% literacy. 95 or 7, something like that, graduation rates. Okay. We're talking astronomical success. And it's so wild to me because anytime I dare to bring this up, I lose followers. I have people totally say, what's wrong with it? There's absolutely nothing wrong with a child learning to read if they're ready,
right.
but it's developmental, just like walking is developmental. So what if I said, teach your child to walk at 6 months? You think I was nuts? I mean, maybe there's some 6 months old that are ready, but that's an outlier, right? And so what I'm finding out is it's so interesting to me because the research actually indicates that children that are taught those skills before they're developmentally ready, they actually plateau or lose their advance and even maybe don't continue to progress by the time they're in 3rd grade. And that's the time where we switch from learning to read to reading to learn. That's
Right.
why they use those test scores. And so what I'm trying to help people understand is, you know, you're missing so many components of. I'm not talking whole language. I'm not talking whole language. I'm talking about phonemic awareness, phonological awareness. They're taking rhyming out of curriculum in kindergarten because you don't.
Yeah, and that's part of the phonics, right? Being able to hear the beginning, the middle, the end, and pull out the middle and the end, and
Yes, well,
switch out the first
yeah, it's
sound.
that's the phonological awareness, phonemic awareness. It's a kind of an umbrella category. And what like rhyming. Okay, so let's just say we don't have to rhyme to learn to read, but we know that kids that can rhyme outpace their peers all the way into third, fourth grade. So yes, a dyslexia and all of those things, oftentimes we see trouble with rhyming, but the reason they're using research that applies to dyslexia to make a decision for all students instead of saying, all right, this is what's good for long-term reading. Maybe some children are going to have a harder time with that, and we know why, but we still shouldn't take the opportunity away from them to learn or be exposed to that skill. Children that enter kindergarten knowing 7 nursery rhymes, they outpace their peers because they have fluency.
Really?
They have fluency, vocabulary. There's so much, and again, I'm not talking whole language. Phonics is important, but we're missing the forest from the tree. And every time I say it, people get upset. Yes, phonics is king, but phonemic awareness is queen,
Mm-hmm.
and the king needs her queen.
Mm-hmm.
So it's my spiel.
And I spent a lot of time trying to learn the difference of the two. It still kind of mushes together in my head.
And they've
I don't
even
know, but
changed it since I went through teacher school, and that's been actually one of the fun things. Is that I dip my toes back in that research and I really read about what they've discovered. Because science of reading, we talk about science of reading and we think, oh, it's the new thing. No, no, science of reading is a live document, it's a living thing, it's ongoing. And it's, something that has been going on for 50 years. So it's not anything, it's just that we're learning new things. And as we learn to do better, then we do better, right? But the pendulum is just swinging, and that's what I'm trying. My message to families is, yes, phonics, but don't forget to do like you talked about, the reading aspect. Reading with kids, you're teaching your children so much. Maybe kids aren't going to learn to read from that per se, not every child, but they're learning concepts about print. They're learning, having a positive dynamic with literature. There's so much there that I fear we're missing right now because we're in a very technological age, and parents in this literacy crisis are being given a message. And I mean, yes, it is unnerving as a parent, to hear some of what's going on as far as the outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm finding that there's a lot of taking advantage of that panic on the part of parents, and for me, my commitment has always been to, even if the message is not popular, if it's what I know to be true and it's what's in the research, or it's what I'm going to stay true to what's true. I'm not going to just say what's popular. And sometimes that makes me not popular. Okay.
well, the truth hurts. But yeah, I think definitely if we spent more time just reading to our kids in those early years and not pressuring them to, be on par with their peers, they're going to get a love for story, a love for language. It opens their mind up to being creative. Like if you're reading to them and they have to imagine that picture in their head, even if the illustration's there, they're imagining it moving and what could be on the next page. That's all developing this love of reading, so that if they do learn how to read at 8, 9, 10 years old, they've already developed the love of it, and the learning how to read is going to come easier. So therefore, they're going to just want to be readers. Whereas if it's always book work, learn your A's, learn your B's, aces, then everything is just rules, rules, rules before you're cognitively ready because you've been jolted awake at 5:30 a.m. and your synapses haven't
Correct.
made those connections yet.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now you're just memorizing because you're not able to make sense of it. You just
Yeah.
memorizing. So
I don't
I think it's a
think,
beautiful message to just go
I
ahead.
don't think there's an age when that stops. I taught middle school. I was a language arts teacher for 20 years. I read aloud to my classes
Absolutely.
probably on at least 3 days a week.
Kids
I
want
read aloud,
that.
and they were in sixth, seventh, eighth grade. Kids
Mhm.
love it. I have a high schooler now, and we start our homeschool day every day by me reading aloud to them. And I have a 6-year-old all the way through a 15-year-old.
Love that.
We read
Oh,
aloud, and I don't think. I mean, there's so much that kids can learn from sitting on the lap of a parent when they're little. We're
Mhm.
all home. Even if you send your kid to public school, you're a homeschooler because you're your child's first teacher. And
Absolutely.
if they don't learn something from you, you can't expect them to go to school and learn from teachers that are strangers. So we're reading, but stories, fiction stories, we learn empathy, we learn sympathy, we learn how to handle grief, how to celebrate. We learn so much from stories. We can read nonfiction stories and learn about, the lives of other people, the adventures of other people. We can get information from that. But it's about fluency too. So even when they are old enough to read on their own, if you're reading aloud, they're learning vocabulary, they're learning
Mhm.
fluency. I don't know how many students I have had who've come to parent teacher conferences and the parent will say, my child really struggles with reading, what can I do? And I always say, hey, if you really want to learn how to play basketball, what do? You get in the gym and you practice, right? That's what you do. You don't just sit around going, I wonder what I can do to get better at basketball. You go practice. So if you want to get better at reading, read a book. Pick up a book. I always told parents, you read a page, let them read a page. You read aloud to them while they look at the words. I've seen kids who have developed so much better fluency just because we read aloud to them, and they would be 12 or 13 years old. So it doesn't stop just because they've outgrown,
Mhm.
that, oh, I'm learning phonics stage.
Right.
That continues as they get older. We don't.
Absolutely.
I was just talking to a homeschooler and I cannot remember her handle. I want to give her credit for this, but she said that with her son, she would have him hold her thumb as he was reading a book to her, and when he got stuck on a word, he'd squeeze her thumb and she'd just say the
Yeah.
word. So that they didn't have to take that whole time to say, "Mom, what's this word?" or stumble on it. And now you're losing the
Right.
story. And she was like, if you couldn't do something as an adult, we wouldn't force you to do it. You sound it out. You would just help the person, just help them. So she said he would just squeeze her thumb and she'd say the word he couldn't say, and on they'd go with the story. And next time they read it, there were less words he had to squeeze her thumb for. I'm like, oh my God, that is such an awesome, awesome
Yeah.
way to, I love
And
that.
you can't have that in the
Um,
classroom setting, right? Because it just doesn't allow for that. I
yes.
mean, I was my whole thing was differentiation in the classroom, but could I do it to the level that I did for myself? Partially because I wasn't even allowed to.
Right. And
You
30
know,
plus kids. Yeah.
yeah, even 20, it doesn't matter. It's you just can't do it. And that's what another thing that's different in the dynamics is we had to take some steps back and we had to scaffold and say, okay, we're gonna start at his lowest level of success rate, and we're gonna just and you talked about that too, I mean, that's what you do. You meet them where they're at, and if they're making progress, then you are being successful and you're doing your role. So yeah, definitely just a different setting.
Mhm.
So before we get kicked off here at the hour, Deanna, where can people find your YouTube page if they want to check it out to help their kids learn how to read in a very fun way? I don't know how you put these scripts all together and you're touching the elbow and the nose and
How I
oh my
taught.
gosh, it's so
That's how I
fun.
taught. I was the singing
I love it.
kindergarten teacher, and I kind of love it. Um,
I loved it.
my colleagues made fun of me even for that, but yeah, that's okay. It's cool. Um, So on YouTube, Dr. Deanna is Learning for Littles. And I also have some episodes that are just for parents to give them information about the pedagogy and like just how to teach or little simple strategies. I'm all about keeping it simple, that we don't have to buy all the things, that you can replicate at home. So yeah, Dr. Deanna's Learning for Littles on YouTube.
Awesome. And I will save this live and we can put that right in the comments so people can check it out. And Leigh Ann, where can people, if you have any closing message, and where can people find your book and the title of it? And we'll put that in the comments
Yeah, my
as
book
well.
is called Making the Switch. You can find it at Barnes and Noble. You can, or online. Typically you can find it at Barnes and Noble, Amazon, and it's called Making the Switch. My name, Leigh Ann Scott, as the author. So, and yeah, other than that, I'm just hanging out here on Instagram sometimes, but when I'm not homeschooling, but yeah, and I would say, yeah, as far as like a transition, one of my things for parents was I used to say, oh, you have to know the laws in your state and you have to research and but you don't. If you know what the laws in your state are, um, then you can pull your kids and you can start homeschooling tomorrow. And, that you don't have to wait and you can learn with them as you go. And I can't remember, I didn't know how to do any algebra 1. And now I'm a little better at it than I was. I took it, I just didn't remember it. And I've learned here that I had completely forgotten. I learn with my kids. When I can't remember, we learn together. And so don't think that because you don't have a PhD or even a bachelor's degree or maybe a diploma. Just if you want to do it, if it's important to you, you can do it, and you can learn with them. Because I did not think that I would. I had always taught middle school students. I always taught students who knew how to read, for the most part, and they learned from their abilities. I did not think I could teach kids how to read, but I taught my son how to read, and now I'm teaching my daughter how to read. You can do it. You can do it, and you can learn with them. If you don't know how to do it, and people say, well, I don't have the money. Well, go to the library and get a library card, and that's free, and you're good to go. So you can do it. You just have to be resourceful. You have to really want to do it and love your children, and that's all you need.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I think the deschooling process is so important. Don't replicate the school at home. If you pull them tomorrow, do not think that you need a curriculum or anything. Take that time to learn how to be a family together. You can look up reading lists if but like you said, the library card. And what I do is I get books from a reading list and I can order them from an app and they go right to my library. So I pick up 30 books at a time, and like we just have a couple weeks of books now that we can go through a few times. And and I think just going out in nature and talking with your kids, seeing what sparks their interest, and maybe you can get a book on that or go look at a YouTube video or a documentary about that. The free things in your area like museums or nature centers, we have a bird sanctuary up here, state parks, national parks. Like these are the things that we should be going to first versus curriculum, and even just playing board games, just like find some games that you guys enjoy together and have that quality time. So that's what I would also, say for that deschooling process. And then if you continue with that and that's your whole homeschool for the next 12 years, beautiful. And if you want to add curriculum or an online school or anything, like all that stuff is available too. There's just so many options. So, Deanna, thank you so much for joining me. Leigh Ann, thank you for joining me. Thank you for your 20 years in the school system, and then for kind of shedding a light onto, hey, it can be different. It can be done
Yep.
differently.
Absolutely.
Yep. Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.